BC mindset.
Yeah.
Oh.
So here we go. Hey, Trey.
Wow. Hey, John. Cheers.
How are you?
Pretty good. I'm ready for a nice glass of Chardonnay. It was a really warm weekend here, and it cooled off today. But I'm feeling thirsty and excited to talk about Chardonnay with you.
Me too.
It's fun that this is going to be our last tasting for a little bit, because you and I, whenever we're here together tasting in the cellar, we always start with Pinot Noirs, whether it's lunch or whether it's blending or whether it's tasting in the cellars barrel to barrel. We always start with Pinot Noir and end with Chardonnay. So I think it's pretty fitting to do Chardonnay right now.
I agree. Chardonnay in Santa Rita Hills, and especially at Sanford, is a little bit kind of unheralded, right? And you and I are very passionate about Chardonnay, and I thought it would be a good idea for us to, chat with our friends and our club members about, some of the things that we're thinking about with Chardonnay, because I think it's, in some ways, it's kind of misunderstood, because there's so many different styles, right?
Oh yeah. And the popular style in the New World, and certainly in California since the late 80s onward, and maybe even earlier, I wouldn't know, but it was that rich, robust, very oak driven, very butter driven Chardonnay, which is done so well on the North Coast in the warmer parts of Sonoma and Napa, but certainly the cooler parts of Sonoma and certainly Santa Rita Hills, which is very cool. We just don't make Chardonnay like that down here. It's not what we get naturally.
Yeah. So look at the operative word, as far as I'm concerned, is naturally, right? And as we continue to share some common ideas and thoughts with our guests about what comes naturally from the vineyard. So I thought it would be a good idea maybe to share with our guests a little bit about the history of Chardonnay in California, and kind of maybe even a little bit of history of Chardonnay in Burgundy, and how some of these various styles develop. Do you think that would be a good conversation to share with our friends?
Yeah, lead the way. take us on the journey.
So look at if you go back to Burgundy, 900 years ago, when the Cistercian monks basically had two varietals to experiment with. They had Chardonnay and they had Pinot Noir, and the one thing that the monks did that was very different was that they took notes, and they did the Renaissance version of trials, right? So and they would test, like, we're going to put Pinot Noir here and we're going to put Chardonnay over there, and they would see how it worked out, and then they would make changes and say, well, I don't think this is a great vineyard for Chardonnay, so we're going to change it over to Pinot Noir, and vice versa. And they did these trials and they made notes, and that's really how the vineyards in Burgundy were planted, and that's how you ended up with the Hill of Corton being Chardonnay, and Chassagne, most of Chassagne, most of Puigny, being Chardonnay, and most of Von Romane being Pinot Noir. And so they did these trials, and they tried to figure out, what did well in which location. So then fast forward, 900 years to Napa. If you go back to the 70s and think about the Chardonnays that were being made in the 70s, that was really a turning point for Chardonnay in California.
Yeah, I've had so many great Chardonnays from Sanford and Benedict and Chalone from back in the 70s, and a handful of other appellations across the U.S.
That's right.
Hey, Patrick, up in Napa, they were growing Chardonnay up in Napa in the 70s really well also. But Amanda, welcome from New Hampshire. Good to see a good person from New Hampshire.
And hey,
for your guy state.
Hey, Tim Clark, nice to see you. Welcome.
Hey, Tim.
So, if you think about Northern California and the climate there, and you think about the 70s and what was going on, I think Chardonnay started to come into its own, but it was a little bit warmer climate, and the wines potentially were a little bit more effusive, and there was an opportunity to make a style that was a little bit bigger, a little bit more robust, a little bit more flavorful. And then the wine critics actually started to give some some higher scores to wines that were a little bit more oak, a little bit more tropical, and all of a sudden the consumers started gravitating towards these oaky, butterscotchy, vanilla, tropical Chardonnays, promulgated by higher scores. And all of a sudden there was this style of California Chardonnay that was developed, that was the style that, most people know, right?
Yeah, it's certainly not the style that we're getting in the Star Rita. Santa Rita Hills, it's even if we wanted to make that rich and robust style of Chardonnay, we don't have that heat and that warmth and those rich soils to do that.
That's right.
It's a real uphill battle.
That's right. So then I think about, people ask me, well, why does the Sanford Chardonnay taste so different? They have this preconceived notion in their mind about what Chardonnay is going to taste like, California Chardonnay. And then we put the Sanford wines in front of them. And they say, wait a second, this isn't what I'm used to. This is different. Like, why is this different? And you and I have talked about this a lot, right? We talk about different microclimate. We have, marine-based soil, some sedimentary soil on the Rinconada property, and we've got much cooler climate. So the acidity is much more, visible and bright. And if we were to try and steer the fruit at Sanford to, maybe a Northern California style, it would really be contrived, right?
Oh yeah, it'd be a lot of work.
It'll be a lot of work.
It was the big eye opener when it's what got me to move down from the Sonoma Coast down to Santa Barbara, was tasting some of the great examples from La Rinconada and from Sanford and Benedict. I couldn't believe the elegance and the acidity and just beautiful Chardonnays that were made down here. I don't know what I was thinking. I was so ignorant of the Santa Rita Hills and Santa Barbara County in general. I was total Sonoma Coast snob. But we did this big tasting in San Francisco back in, I think it was like 2010, 2011. It was the first In Pursuit of Balance tasting. And I tasted, the wines from this area there, and I was just floored. And it's just so much easier to make Chardonnay down here because we have those high pH soils and the really cool weather that gives us the acidity that so many people struggle to hold on to. I love it.
Yeah, and interesting note from Tim Clark that the flow from white Zinfandel, which had higher residual sugar, over to Chardonnay, was a very easy leap. And if you think about, there's a couple of brands from Napa that had kind of higher residual sugar, easier to drink. I mean, let's face it, we're the largest Coca-Cola guzzling, ice cream schnarfing, Twinkie eating country in the world. I hate to say that, but it's true. I plead truth is the ultimate defense, right? And so sweeter, I learned that in law school. Sweeter wines.
I've been eating through the pandemic as well.
Exactly. So sweeter wines were, kind of embraced, and they were, I guess, a natural progression. But when I think about, I was thinking about California. You and I talked about this a little bit. I don't know from a 50,000 foot view if it's fair to say that there's a California style of Chardonnay, because when I think about all these different microclimates and all these different places and what they have to offer, the wines that come from those places, if they're really representations of the vineyard and not, representations of some idea that somebody has in their mind, in Santa Rita Hills, for instance, we have the opportunity to make these wines, which are really, incredibly bright in terms of their acidity, and we're being true to the place. And so when people taste our wines, they say, hey, why is this different? Well, it's because man is involved, but we're not interfering, right? And that's what I think about when I taste the Santa Rita Hills. We should probably talk a little bit about the wines, but I just feel like these are wines that are terroir driven. We've heard that a lot, but when you taste a wine like this, you realize that it comes from a place.
Oh yeah.
Not from some perception that somebody had in their mind about what it should taste like, right?
No, and that's the fun thing. So you have the Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay, which, I mean, this is our calling card, the 2017 Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay, and the blessing with this wine is it's all estate grown from La Rinconada, and Sanford and Benedict. And it's, we have the luxury of making that wine and not having to get fruit from the neighbor next door that grows it real cheap. And so it's a direct calling card for the Santa Rita Hills. It's got everything that I love. It's bright, it's citrus driven, it's got lots of minerality, it's really savory.
Yeah, and look, I think people often ask us, you and I are usually together when somebody says, well, the Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay, tell me about that. What's that all about? So look, really simple answer is we have these two ranches. We've got the Rinconada Ranch, and we've got the Sanford and Benedict Ranch. Trey and I
We'll bring up a map right now, just to help you out there, John.
Yeah. We've got some Sanford Wine Club members on too. Welcome. Hi, Danielle. How are you? Hi, Tammy. Tammy, hey, I love that you started with Chablis. That's fabulous. I love Chablis. Okay, so here's the two ranches, right? Sanford and Benedict is mostly Pinot Noir. Rinconada is mostly Chardonnay. When Trey is, thinking about the Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay, we're tasting through the barrel lots. We're trying to identify what we have. We've got some wines that are set aside for single block. We've got some wines that are dedicated to single vineyard, Rinconada and F&B. And then Trey is saying, okay, well, we know where we want to land in terms of the Sanford and Benedict, the Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay. So let's start putting some blends together from the two ranches that are a great representation of the place, right? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's fun because the next wine we're going to taste, La Entrada, comes from Block 5, which will be at the top of your screen, R5, highlighted in yellow. And then little secret submission that we didn't have in the announcement, but you and I are going to be tasting, will also be coming from R3, which is just next to it. And so the reason why we chose those blocks to make a block designate out of was because they were very distinct and had very, very loud voices. And whereas the other blocks are very good, but they seem to play well together a little more. And the further west you go, so the further to the left of your screen on that map, the colder it is. And that's one of the reasons why we have the Chardonnay planted at La Rinconada, but also it's those alluvial soils. And we'll show you a picture of the vineyard right now. We'll bring it up so you can kind of see which section we're talking about from a photograph. But right there surrounding the winery is where most of the Chardonnay is planted. And that's not by accident. That's what you were talking about earlier, John, with trial and error, and how the monks in Burgundy found out that Pinot Noir worked in one area and didn't work in another, and Chardonnay worked in one area and vice versa. Well, those alluvial soils that form there from the Santa Ynez River and that cold weather really works well with Chardonnay. And it makes my job very easy. We don't have to worry about the acidity falling out of the wines when we're picking. And we don't have to worry about, adding anything to the wines. It's just all there naturally because, what you can't see is the ocean, which is just 7 miles away. It's just bombarding those vines with cold air all day. And the vines hold on to their acidity pretty effortlessly.
Yeah, so look, we're talking about these two very different properties, right? You've got the Sanford and Benedict property, which is very, very loose, very loose, very fractured Monterey shale, coming from a landslide, maybe 10,000 years ago. And then you've got Rinconada, which is.
And let me pull up the slide to assist you. Sorry to keep interrupting you.
No, it's great. No, it's great. So then you've got the Rinconada property, which is, really as a result of, a meandering oxbow of the Santa Ynez River. It's a million years of
next slide.
Deposits that came. Oh, that's interesting. That's a picture of Michael Benedict. So that's you, Trey, in that blue coat right behind. I wonder why they cut you out of that picture. I'm not quite sure.
I mean, that was a good editorial move. I've been cropped out of a lot of photos in my life, but yeah, that's you and I, Michael, going through the Chardonnay,
Yep.
and you know, I found these photos. I was going through my phone, looking at all these like little harvest snapshots, and you know, a lot of people don't see sort of these aren't super behind the scenes, but you can see. You know, the top left of your screen, those are all Chardonnay samples when the wines are fermenting, and we taste those every day, once a day. You know, no matter how tired we are of tasting juice samples or fermentations, you know, to keep an eye on the temperature and the amount of sugar that's being eaten by the yeast. And then the picture below that is our press pan that is right below our press. And so when we start picking the grapes around midnight and get them to the winery, we start pressing usually about 7 in the morning, and that's all the juice. The light press juice coming out from the press to be fermented in our beautiful cellar. But
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about, well, I know it's a little geeky. It's kind of talking about oxygenation and the settling in the settling tank and Chardonnay, and how we like to give it a little bit of oxygen so that, you know, it's kind of like your kids, you know, they say that, you know, kids eat like a bushel full of dirt in their lifetime, and that's what helps them. Right? I know it's a crazy.
believe it.
It's a little. I believe it too. Like, you know, somebody drops a piece of watermelon on the ground and they eat it, and it helps them build up a tolerance to, you know, bacteria, and the same holds true for Chardonnay. That we think that it benefits from exposure to oxygen early in its life, that helps it then to age more gracefully and not be subjected to premature oxidation over time. So that's a great picture. Should we show the picture of the two different vineyards and how they were formed, and the ones with, you know, the one with the arrows? Is that a good picture for right now, Trey? What
Yep.
do you?
We'll bring that slide up right here. And so
Yeah.
this is looking down directly on top of our property from on high. And so you can see those arrows. You drew those arrows, didn't you, John?
Hmm.
Those
I
are
did.
pointed directly onto the mountain that used to stand about 10, 11,000 years ago, directly above Sanford and Benedict. That in a big landslide about 11,000 years ago came down and formed what we know as Sanford and Benedict Vineyard. And just to the left of where those arrows are and where you can see that landslide went is the wines that we're tasting right now. That's La Rinconada. And that's alluvial soil. So that was deposited by the Santa Ynez River, which is in the top of your screen. It looks a little dry in that photo, but there's usually water running through it in the winter. And those soils were deposited over millions and millions of years from the overflow of that river.
Yeah. So
There we go.
two very different soil types, two very different representations of the vineyards. Tonight we have the La Entrada as one
I
of
just
the
poured
wines.
some.
Yeah, incredible length on that wine. You know, just extraordinary. Tim's bombarding us with questions. I love this. We have to talk a little bit about, you know, the history and the history of Wente and Michael Benedict, and how he, you know, chose some clones from Wente a long ways back, right when he planted the vineyard, and he wasn't. He never likes to talk about it, but he believes that the original clones that came to Sanford were the Chambertin clones from Burgundy. But Tim also asked a little bit about reference points, like what are the Chardonnays that Sanford aspires to. So it's a hard question to answer. I'll do the best I can.
It is hard.
Yeah, it is hard. So look at it. When I think about the greatest Chardonnays in the world, Chardonnays that have aging potential. They're beautiful when they're young, but they're age worthy. They have incredible length. Their structure is amazing. There's a lot of there. You know, they're not, you know, wines that you just kind of put in your mouth and, like, you know, at a cocktail party. There's a lot going on. They're mostly from Burgundy, just in terms of structure. So I want to be careful about this, because a lot of people, you know, like horsewhip me about this idea of, you know, why do you keep talking about Burgundy? And my answer is because they have 900 years of experience and trials, And the structure of the Chardonnays that come from Burgundy are provocative, right? You put them in your mouth and they just cause you to think, if you want to, right?
Absolutely.
Right? You could sit and enjoy them, with some, a cheese spread and a cracker if you want. But you could also pause and say, boy, this is just so interesting. Like, how the heck did this happen? So when I think about reference points, I think about the structure that comes from the structure of the wines from Burgundy and at some level Chablis. But again, we're always referencing and always maintaining our true identity. This is a California vineyard. These wines are born of a California
Absolutely.
right? And so we know that that's our place. That's our birthplace. And then the question is, how do we make wines that are great representations that have the same kind of structure, the depth of structure, balance, acidity, mouthfeel, length, typicity, right? As it relates to Chardonnay, Trey and I are always trying to highlight the place. So I would say the wines that I enjoy in terms of their structure are the great whites of Burgundy. I know that the winemakers that are friends of mine in Burgundy understand the personalities of their vineyards very well. And Trey and I are trying to understand the personalities of the vineyards that we have at Sanford. And so those are our, I don't want to say benchmarks. There are guideposts, so to speak, in terms of structure. But then again, we're going back to the fact that these are wines that are born of a California vineyard. And we're trying, right? You want to talk a little bit about that, Trey?
Yeah. It's. I love Burgundy, but we're certainly not trying to make it in Santa Rita Hills. And I think La Entrada is a great example of that. It's planted at the front of the property. It's right by the tasting room. The soils are a little, for Rinconada, they're a little on the richer side, and I think that translates really well into this wine. I think this wine has tremendous structure and depth, and it has richness, but it also has the beautiful acidity that La Rinconada gives, and the elegant minerality. And I think this wine kind of balances sort of like lots of beautiful weight, but it's not tiring. It's on a trajectory once I taste it. And I got to admit, I'm cheating this time, John. I got some Comte and some almonds because this is at the end of my day, and I only had an apple for lunch, so I thought I should have some food with you.
Did you go to that website, that cheese website that Christoph suggested?
I did. I spent way too much money.
It's extraordinary. It's unbelievable.
It's really good. It's one of my favorite pairings, though. I love Chardonnay because I can have it with just a simple cheese and almonds and be completely content, or I can have it with a roast chicken, or I can make, just a simple fish dish with my wife, and I'm totally happy.
Yeah.
Or by the pool.
So, Tim, I agree with you. Santa Rita Hills may be the only place in the U.S. that has the potential to build the kind of structure that Trey and I just described, right? And that, again, this is the brilliance of Michael Benedict. Back in the genius of what he saw back in 1970 or 71, 72, where he identified this location as having extraordinary potential. Everybody else told him that he was crazy. And he said, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And he did it incredibly thoughtfully. And today we're reaping the rewards and the benefits of the foresight that Michael had as a pioneer in planting vineyards in this location. And I agree, it's arguably one of the rare few places where we have the ability to build the kind of structure that we described, especially because of the combination of cool climate and the Monterey Shale, the marine-based soils and the alluvial soils that we have. Right, this is the joy of the Chardonnay that comes from our property.
Yeah, and I think working with that and talking about the trials, I think it's fun to talk about Chardonnay because when you taste the La Entrada and the Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay together, it does throw a lot of people off. And a lot of it is place. I mean, choosing the right place to grow takes out so much of the work and all the tricks that one would have to perform in the cellar to make up for an uninteresting place. It's why we grow grapes here and not out in Bakersfield, where it'd be real cheap and easy to do. But maybe it wouldn't taste that good.
That's right. You know, we should talk about some of the trials that we do, Trey. Why don't you?
Yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about like the stirring trials and the barrel ferments and how much oak we choose to use and native yeast fermentations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, everyone talks about how difficult Pinot Noir is to make, and it's certainly not something you can just sit back and relax on. But Chardonnay is just work every step of the way. Like in the vineyard, Chardonnay has a really floppy canopy, and so we usually have to do an extra pass that we don't have to do in the other blocks of Pinot Noir to make sure that the canopy is growing upright, because it just wants to go everywhere. And then it's more susceptible to mildew and botrytis. So we have to, once we get that canopy back up again, we have to make sure it's open enough so that we don't get any mildew or botrytis in the grapes, like you can see on your roses. Sometimes you get that white powdery mildew. And so every step along the way, it just makes you work for it. And the pressing is incredibly complex. When do we start it? When do we stop it? But then we get to the élevage, and that's when Chardonnay, you can kind of steer the ship a little more than most wines. A lot of it is strictly, what you get from the vineyard. There's only so much movement you can do in the cellar. But with Chardonnay, it's a little more, the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, and what butterfly do you want? And with the trials that we've done, we've really gotten away from a lot of stirring and really been thoughtful about our stirring trials. So when we press the Chardonnay and we ferment it, it goes into a barrel, and it sleeps there for 16 months. And as it sleeps, all these lees settle on the bottom of the barrel, all the yeast cells and sort of the grape material, and we can stir those, and that'll add a lot of richness and a lot of weight and a lot of sometimes heavy characteristics if you do it too much. And so we've done a lot of trials where we don't stir any barrels, and we stir them once or we stir them two, as opposed to a lot of places which stir, once a week, whether you need to or not. And we found that our wines react really well if they aren't stirred, or if they're stirred just once. And we're really, really focused on just little details like that, using less new oak. All of our wines are made with French oak because, for better or for worse, I know, John, you like me, you're a good blue-blooded American, but American oak just doesn't work on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir so well, and so it's all French oak. But we found that using less and less new French oak goes so much further in helping the vineyard express itself and not overshadowing it. What other trials have we done with Chardonnay? God, it seems like a lot to go over.
We did stirring.
We've done a lot of oak trials with different cooperages.
Right. We're doing some of the trials on the barrel ferments, making sure that we get enough heat during fermentation. Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've been turning it up.
Here's the part that I think is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I so enjoy talking to you about this, because you have such incredible confidence and restraint when it comes to winemaking that I always get the sense that you feel as if you don't have to go into the winery and do something every day, right? You know that there's a lot to do if you want to.
Just naturally a lazy Californian by nature.
Yeah, right. But there's days where you go into the winery, and I know it because we've talked about this. And we're tasting barrels, and you're saying, look, we just need to leave this one alone for right now. We need to leave this barrel lot alone for right now, because we could put our fingerprints on it for sure. We could intercede. We could make adjustments. We could do things. But there's so often you choose to just like say, hey, let's just let this unfold on its own. It's almost like you can't force a flower to bloom prematurely, right?
Yeah. It took a long time to get there.
Yeah, but you have a ton of experience in knowing that sometimes you just have to let these wines progress and come into their own without putting, our fingerprints on them, right?
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
it's like, go in the office, sit on your hands, don't do anything, leave it alone, and let it come into its own. It has to come into its own. Let's not force it.
Yeah, I hate to use, I don't know if it's a false equivalency, but it's with parenting kind of like winemaking, and I'm such a young parent still. I hate to even be using this analogy, but there is a little bit of benign neglect. We're always watching and we're always there, but having the power to do nothing was something that if I didn't have a mentor, for a lot of years making wine after I'd made wine for a lot of years, I don't think I would understand that that fear or that idea that, oh, I need to do something, I need to get in the way of this or steer this a little more has usually hurt me instead of helped me. And I think having the power to do nothing is important with Chardonnay for sure.
Yeah, that's
And
it's experience.
Yeah, it's experience. I mean, we certainly, I mean, our job, nature wants to take fruit and ripen it and let it fall to the ground and let it ferment. And then once it's done fermenting, let it take it to vinegar. And certainly there's a lot of steps in between there that the winemaker intercedes and steers nature to their will. But, getting in the way of it and making it taste like this is a Trey Fletcher wine instead of a wine of place is just, at this stage of my life, it's not where I think I want to be. And I'm glad you and I get the opportunity to do it with a vineyard with a track record.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I think this is just the beginning. When I think about the opportunities that we have for understanding the vineyard, what it has to offer, the personality, and how we steer is not the right word. How we shepherd these wines along without steering them is really the magic to this, the mysticism, if you will. Even though my view is that it's our responsibility to demystify wine, right?
Absolutely. Should we bring up the photo with La Entrada so people can kind of see
Sure.
kind of the soil of La Entrada and what the grapes look like today? So La Entrada, it's right at the entry of La Rinconada, and that's the one John and I are tasting right now, the 2016. And you can see the soils on the left side. There's almost no rock at all. That's when we were talking about alluvial deposits. It's basically a fancy way to say, it's what the river left, millions of years. And there's very little rock. And you can see in that center picture, that was a day that John and I and Michael Benedict, and you can see in this photo, there's Augie, our longtime cellar master, and Laura Roach, our longtime associate winemaker, and Eric Malia, our ingenious vineyard manager, are down in a soil pit. And we dig soil pits quite frequently. And this one was dug about this time last year. And you can't see it in the picture because it's small, but you can see there's these big roots that are just coming out of the side of that soil pit. And, that tells us that not only are we getting down to the really interesting things that the vine can find to allow it to express itself, but that we have really, really open and loose and beautiful soil with enough water holding capacity. At that time, John, we dry farmed that block last year. And then you can see the grape cluster. And so notice the grape cluster in the La Entrada. It's much bigger, it's much fuller, and that doesn't translate into how the wine tastes so much. But when we go to the next slide and show you our next block that we're kind of teasing out for the first time, you'll see the soils don't look so much more different, but the grape cluster looks tremendously different. And that's in direct relation to the soil and also the wind on this site. And so do you have your long rose block in your glass?
I do. I'm stunned, right? Again, this is why we grafted over, right? Because we should tell that story about grafting over the block next door that's Pinot Noir, because we were so pleased with what we have in long rose, in the long rose block.
Yeah, so I have to apologize to everybody. This is a wine that only John and I have, and we couldn't share with all of you because it's sleeping in the cellar and we haven't released it yet. So this will be our newest Chardonnay block designate from La Rinconada, and is that your mock-up label?
That's our mock-up label.
Blue tape.
Blue tape, looking pretty
Perfect.
good.
Looks good to me. Ship it. And so the long rows we grafted over from Pinot Noir, and this was part of the trials. You know, it was a section that we thought early on, let's try Pinot Noir in this lighter soil, the soil that we find on the western edge of La Rinconada, and it was nice, but it just didn't really say anything. It didn't have, you know, the presence that the other Rinconada Pinot Noir blocks had. So it was like, okay, let's try Chardonnay and see if that works. And lo and behold, we got a very distinct Chardonnay, and you could see those hens and chicks that Tim Clark mentioned from the photo come from this section, and that gives us tremendous concentration, lots of depth, lots of elegance, and lots of length. I love this wine.
You remember, Trey, we actually had a friend from Burgundy who tasted that barrel with us. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
And he looked at us, and he had, you know, complete surprise on his face. And he said something like, I guess we're not the only people that can make extraordinary Chardonnay. He said, I just had no idea that this was possible here. And that was one of the signals, you know, to you and I that we probably should expand that vineyard, the Long Rose vineyard, by a couple of more rows into the Pinot Noir vineyard, because we knew that the quality of the fruit and the quality of the Chardonnay, you know, far exceeded the quality of the Pinot Noir. And look, that's a hard decision, right? We're like, okay, look.
Oh, it was a hard decision.
It's like, look, we need more Chardonnay from this block because it's so extraordinary, it's so unique, it's so different. You know, we're just going to have to graft it, and we're going to have to take some of the Pinot Noir out, and we're going to have to put in, you know, graft in some Chardonnay. But we knew what we were going to get when we knew how the movie ended, right? Which is why I love this R3 Chardonnay. It has so much incredible potential. Frank Richards is asking some questions about soil and sandy loam and the presence of clay. Look at
good questions.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit? I know that we have one little corner of Sanford and Benedict that's really, you know, has a high prevalence of or high incidence of clay, but the rest of the vineyard. You want to talk a little bit about the vineyard composition in terms of clay?
Yeah. So those pictures, Frank, that we just had up were from La Rinconada, and those had very little clay present in them. So those are a sandy loam. And usually when a soil scientist, and I took a lot of soil science in school, but rest assured, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a soil scientist. I'm just dangerous enough to express there was a triangle. And usually, you know, one side of the triangle is clay, one is silt, and one is sand. And kind of when those come together in roughly homogeneous terms, that is what you would have as a loam. And this is a sandy loam, so sand is the higher prevalence, and there's less clay here, which why it works for us for Chardonnay. Chardonnay in our area, not in all areas, but generally works in much lighter soils. And although you can't really tell that that's a light soil from the picture, if you can imagine, just that was taken this morning. We're in the middle of July. We haven't had rain in months. You would expect the soils to be very firm and very hard. I mean, you could reach into that picture and just scoop that soil out with your hand, and it wouldn't be like beach sand per se, but it would be very, very loose and very sandy. And that is what we mean by a sandy loam. Now, a clay, we all know clay. I spent the better part of my weekend working on trying to get a lawn installed on very heavy clay soils. And usually you can tell a clay soil for the layman if you walk across it and it's wet, and you know you're getting layers of soil on the bottom of your boots, and you're getting taller and taller. All of that's accumulating and sticking so beautifully to the bottom of your shoes is a clay. We don't have very much clay at all in La Rinconada. We have a little bit in Sanford and Benedict. And as a rough rule, certainly clay works better with reds and with Pinot Noir. It gives a little more structure to the wine, roughly. Not always. Do you agree, John?
Yeah, I do. I look at, clay also works really well with Merlot, right? I mean, we know, historically that some of the most important vineyards in the world and some of the greatest Merlot founded wines do well in clay soil. But we only have a very small section of clay in our vineyard over in Sanford and Benedict in the corner. But what I love about this, the soil pits and the descriptor that you used around our soils, look at this loose soil, this what I call uncompacted soil, loose, fractured Monterey shale. I mean, it's a perfect environment to grow grapevines, right?
Yeah, you're not going to grow anything else in it. I mean, it's like cattle for grazing or grapevines. Those are your options.
That's right. And so we know that the vines, we really want the vines to grow downward in search of nutrients and hydration. Trey mentioned that we dry farmed. Was it 19 that we dry farmed or 19 that we dry farmed, right?
And 19 we dry farmed completely. And this year, we turned the water on 2 times, but really small. And I mean, we haven't turned the irrigation on for several months. So, we'd like to dry farm the whole thing, but the whole vineyard, but, certainly responsibly.
Right. But remember when so for all of you out there that are listening, when we're digging these soil pits, one of the things that we're really super interested in is the root structure. Like what's happening with the roots, which way are they going? Are they kind of lazy and going sideways? Or are they really truly going, downward, looking for hydration and nutrients? And the good news is that when we're digging these soil pits and we're getting down to like 8, 9, 10 feet, we're finding a high degree of moisture, not standing water, but that soil is wet.
Yeah.
Right. So the vine's like saying, "Hey, the water is below me. I need to go this way," and that's where it finds its nutrients as well. And that's exactly what we want. If you think about vine architecture, all of us are used to seeing what's happening above the ground. But if you really think about it, the vine is totally supported by what's happening under the ground. It's supported by this root ball, and the structure of the root ball and the depth of the root system is what really gives life and vitality to the vine. So Trey and I are as interested in what's happening below the ground as we are about what's happening above the ground. And I know that this is probably way too geeky and we're down the rabbit hole, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, we're farmers, and we've got soil conditions, we've got a vine that's a creeper, we've got this root system, we have the stuff that's going on up above, and our job is to make sure that it delivers to us the highest quality fruit possible. So maybe a little too technical, maybe a little too geeky, but those soil pits tell us so much.
Absolutely. I can't imagine how little we would know without constantly running out there with the Yanmar and digging these soil pits. Right. Tammy, good to see you again. Not over oaked, not American oak, but elegant. And that's something that's really important. How much you and I talk about oak, because I think it's really fantastic that France has sustainably farmed these beautiful oak forests from perhaps before the time of Napoleon. And we get to age our wines in it, but we're not farming out in the Santa Rita Hills to taste French oak, and it's definitely something that can help the vineyard come into itself. But with Chardonnay, it's so easy to overdo it with oak or with stirring or with using a cultured yeast that gives you a flavor, or with filtration or fermentation temperature that I really love the fact that you and I are, on the same wavelength, on the same 3-legged race, and love the same Chardonnays. Wines that are really true to place, and wines that are elegant, wines that age well, and wines with real conviction and length. I love it. Goes well with my Comte Day.
It does. So look at this whole idea of oak. We're going to talk. Tim Clark asked an interesting question. We'll talk about oak. Look at you and I again. We're philosophically aligned. We see things the same way. Oak is an aging vessel, In our mind, oak is a vessel in which to age wines during élevage, during barrel aging. It is not, in my mind, a spice. It's not something
No.
that we should smell or taste in the wine, because if we've done that, we've really masked the beauty of what the vineyard has to offer. And this kind of answers Tim's question about, people say, oh, I don't want to drink Chardonnay. I don't like California Chardonnay. And then they drink Sanford Chardonnay and they say, God, this is different. This is delicious. Why? And so, Trey, if you could talk about the accretive, value of all of those things that we put together, from, farming to pick window to, acidity to fermentation and élevage and the careful use of oak. Could you explain to people why Sanford Chardonnay tastes different than the typical perception of California Chardonnay?
Yeah, we could do all of those things, but because of the site gives us, these wines that are very direct, very mineral, and really focused. It doesn't give us a heavy, fat, lazy, cheesy, hard to finish bottle of Chardonnay naturally. And we don't fight that. I think for so long, so many people are like, oh, Santa Barbara Chardonnay, it's just got so much acidity. We should pick it really late, and we should add more new oak, and we should stir the lees a lot more, and we should use this fancy yeast from Dijon that makes it taste like, a tropical frozen yogurt. And so we really, have moved towards embracing what this site gives us. It's, we spend so much time and effort, farming in a really challenging, very windy, very cool area. And it would just be a shame to take all of that natural beauty and just completely go a different direction. So we try and work with it, and we embrace it. And a lot of those techniques, a lot of those things, besides just getting out of the way, is realizing, let's pick it when it's ripe, not when we think it's going to taste like, tropical or buttery or something like that. And, at the end of the day, I love making Chardonnay at Sanford, John, because, we're really known for Pinot Noir. But you and I are real Chardonnay lovers, and we love beautiful, elegant, age-worthy Chardonnays. So I think I'm ready to introduce a lot more people to Sanford Chardonnay for sure.
I think you're absolutely right. So look at we've covered a lot of ground. In the end, I hope that what we're talking about, the things that we're thinking about in terms of, farming and when we pick and fermentation and élevage, that it causes people to think, gosh, I'd like to learn more about Chardonnay, or I'd like to taste a version that's like that, or I'd like to share that version that they just described with somebody who says, oh, I really don't like Chardonnay, I don't want to drink Chardonnay. I'm hoping that this is enough information, interesting information, provocative information, that allows our friends and our wine club members to share wines with people and say, hey, this is Sanford Chardonnay, this is different, and this is why these wines are different, this is why they taste different. They're wines that represent a place. So we covered a lot of ground. Gosh, I think we'll be back together, at some point. We've got, a lot of work to do at the winery, and I think we're talking about maybe coming back in August, or we'll see about September, but we'll probably be in harvest. Trey, thank you for making the time to do this together. I love talking to you. I enjoy talking about what we're doing at Sanford, and about the direction. And I look at it in my mind. I always think about the words, "This is just the beginning," right? It's like,
absolutely.
We're really just starting to fully understand what this vineyard is capable of, and your work at the winery, your work in the vineyards, your understanding of what they have to offer. It's just so much fun having these conversations and being there when we're making these wines. So I thank you. Thanks for taking the time. Fun. I love it.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us. From the Terlato family and all of us at Sanford. Have a happy and safe evening. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Take care, John.